Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Baird, a musician whose new album, Vivification Exercises 1, is out now on Revenge International. A record that centers primarily on the piano and repetitive refrains that keep coming back and coming back. There is, as with so much of Kaz music, a convulsive body at the center, this sense of muscles clenching and unclenching. There's almost something quite stressful listening to her music, at least heightened, but it is also gorgeous as well. You've got these piano patterns, peripheral electronics, shivers and gasps of human voice, and the whole thing passes by incredibly quickly and also leaves you feeling quite exhausted. At least it did for me. It's quite an experience to be in this heightened state for so long. It is brilliant. So head over to the Revenge Bandcamp, rvng.bandcamp.com, to listen to and purchase that record. Also head over to Kaz's own website, baird.com, for more information on her, and head over to attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening for more information on Kaz picks and links to her music as well, along with a hefty back catalogue of Crucial Listening episodes. So thank you as always for listening. I had a great time chatting with Kaz. I think you'll enjoy this one. Please enjoy. This is Baird on Crucial Listening. Hello, Kat. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So you are here to talk about 3 important records primarily, but before we get stuck into those records, I want to start by talking about your new record, Vivification Exercises 1, which came out just recently. If I'm right, this is one for which the initial conception, or at least the ideas involved, came out of your time at Roulette's Brooklyn Theatre, is that right?
Yeah, I was a resident there in 2018, an artist in resident, a program that they have through and supported by the Jerome Foundation. And so I was working on an evening of music to be presented, and I had 2 pieces I was working on, both for multiple channels, 4 channels. One was more based around flute and voice, which actually a lot of those pieces ended up going on my Revenge release, Respires, actually. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was this 4-channel piece with piano and electronics. And that's what became the Vivification Exercises 1. And I label it 1 because I do anticipate it being in a series. I was actually going to do a second version of it at the Kitchen with intermediate artist Max Albacher in April of last year, and it got canceled because of COVID. So,
of course.
But yeah, the Vivification Exercises 1 is the first rendition, which was originally performed on 4 channels, the piano in the middle of the space, actually on the floor off the stage with the 4 speakers surrounding it, kind of swirling electronics around a more centralized piano sound.
And I heard you talk a little bit, like a very little bit about it on Roulette's own podcast, actually, like right at the end of the edit. But I'm curious to know, what are your memories, if there are any, of that performance, doing it initially? Like, do you have anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, I think that one of the main things or inspirations with that piece was really like approaching the piano from a very like rhythmic perspective, kind of a rhythmic minimalist perspective. And I think that sort of brings out a bit of a maddening quality to that record. But it was something that was very important to me to do. Most of them I composed entirely on my own, except the very last piece was actually a collaboration with a friend of mine on electronics, Crystal Penalosa. And the performance was, I remember it being a very, very, charged experience, like most live performances are for me. Performance is a integral part of my practice, and a very, very and that's one thing that's definitely been missing in this year of COVID, right?
Right, yeah.
But it was, it was also, I remember being a little disorienting, being performing in the middle of the room with the speakers surrounding it. I remember there being a little bit of trickiness in terms of monitoring, just to get into technicalities. I don't perform on piano as much as I do with voice and electronics and flute. So I think I was very, very nervous. And those pieces were very kind of in a certain way, they were kind of precise. I know if you listen to that, there's definitely some elements of freedom and improvisation within those, but they were pretty, as I said, rhythmic. And so I kind of got flashbacks to, piano recitals as a kid, and my fingers just dripping in sweat. And I think I started off a little shakily, but I eventually, I think, stumbled into the zone. So that recording, though, is actually not from the live performance, because the recording from that performance was meant for 4 channels. So I wanted to re-record the piano, just because, again, I was a little nervous at the performance. So it was the studio version of that live performance.
And I want to ask you about, as well, you mentioned the fact that it was very precise. Playing these motifs that you do, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but incredibly repetitive, incredibly intense to listen to. I mean, I don't know if the word stressful is right, but I mean, I'm hearing when I'm listening, just I can imagine myself trying to play these and being like, I need to keep track of where the emphasis is on this rhythm, because if it's lost, will it ever come back? What's it like to be right in the thick of trying to play these things?
Well, it's a mind game for sure. It's one of those do but not do kind of things. You have to really go into a zone where you don't let your mind trip you up, especially when you're doing something so repetitive and simple. Especially, I guess I'm thinking specifically 2 and 5. Yeah. And I mean, that's where I always want to be when I perform. I want to be in a place where I know technically the material so well that I can just really enjoy the performance and not get caught in the details of the technicalities. But I mean, it's really a hellacious record. I mean, it's really it's not easy. It isn't easy to listen to that. It is. I think it's fair to say it's a fairly anxiety-ridden suite of piano tracks. But it was something I had to get out of my system. I think there was something. It caught a very particular energy for me, and I also find that, I find the piano kind of, it's a challenge for me to find something on there that I want to go deeper into. I think because the piano has been just so explored up and down and all around, and it has so many, I don't know, just reference connotations. I mean, all instruments would agree, but the piano seems particularly loaded, and it's such a huge ass, just kind of pompous instrument. And so I find myself very picky about the piano, and it's about finding where I can, fall into something.
Your voice as well on this record is a really cool element. I'm intrigued as to how you settle upon your approach for these pieces vocally when you're making them? I mean, it feels like something that, the voice, it sounds like such a reflexive presence on the record, but then again, there's something I think maybe about the way that it's recorded or captured, which gives it just this super samurai precision as well. So what
interesting. Total confession here. The vocals were a little bit of an afterthought.
Right.
Maybe that's obvious. So when I originally performed them, there were no vocals. It was all instrumental, minus like a couple like little hoops and that would just kind of come while playing. But, I think that once I got the record to a place where it was like, this is what it was. This is what it is. I had some conversations with some dear friends, and, I was encouraged to possibly explore putting a few more like little punctuations in it to sort of personalize it and warm it up, as if like, because the record had a sort of maybe a little bit of like a cold feeling to it. And so I think the idea was to warm it up with the vocals.
Fair. I mean, I should say, I absolutely love the record. I think even though, as you said, and I mentioned as well, there is an anxiety and a stress to it, it's addictive as well. Those are always the experiences that spin me out.
Thank you so
much. Why am I going in for this again? But something's pulling me in.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it was a record that like I was really going to just kind of let go of, and because, it's a couple years old now. And, I had it sort of, in the archives and sort of brought it back out during COVID. But I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that I decided to let that cat out of the bag.
And where can people check it out as well, Kat?
Well, I think there's still some cassettes if you want a physical copy of it through Commend There, which is a sort of off label of Revenge, the label Revenge, based out of New York. And cool. If you want the digital, I believe, it's definitely on Bandcamp, and you can buy the cassette there as well. I think it's also on your streaming services, if I'm not mistaken.
Super. I will link to all of those. I thoroughly recommend, like I say, people do dive into that record. It's amazing. Carl, we should talk about your important records. And one question I like to ask is about how you thought about the term important when you were coming to your selection. I mean, I got an email through that kind of laid out how you approached it, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, if you could tell me how you thought about the term important to come up with the selection that you did.
Do you want me to answer that, or my quote unquote important records, or just try to kind of do both?
Let's go for both. Let's see what we get to.
Okay. Well, important records, important. I've been doing experimental music since, the late 90s. I started really my music career in Chicago, Illinois. And my first big creative outlet and project was the psych folk band Spires That in Sunset Rise, that I founded with childhood friends, Tara Lee Peterson, Georgia Vallis, and Tracy Peterson. And it was a group that really kind of dominated my creative musical landscape up until when I moved to New York in 2013. So I really, my foundations were like quite deep in Spires. So, some really pivotal records that came out in that era was, I think it was like 2004 was our second record, Four Winds the Walker. It's a real epic classic. It's actually the only Spires record that was never put on LP. And so any of you music geeks out there who like reissues, I cannot tell you how much Four Winds the Walker needs to be reissued on vinyl. Then later, and that was kind of a more wild psychedelic folk, sort of in the vein of like Comus and Harry Parch, just really kind of weird instrument tunings, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe we jump ahead later to a later record of the band, when the band became more just me and Tara. And that was, we'll say, Spires and Sunset Rise, Ancient Patience, Wills It Again, 1 and 2, which was a more kind of evolved place of songwriting where, there was a little more of a polished feel to it, but still definitely in the land of sort of psychedelic folk music. Mm-hmm. And then I would say that Beasts in the Garden, and which is another Spires record, as well as some collaborations that Spires did with Chicago drummer Michael Zarang, kind of took us more than into an improvisation territory where we started to touch the peripheries of free jazz or just, improvisation. And then that sort of bridged me then from my move into New York, where I started to embrace more electronic music and more maybe even an interest in more minimalist takes on things. And so, the 2 solo records then are Cyberpelic Picnic, which came out through Drag City, and then this most recent one, Respires, through Revenge. And both Cyberpelic Picnic and Respires are kind of cousin albums. They have a lot in common. I could almost look at those 2 albums as like a diptych, where I was exploring deeply like rhythm, flute, and voice. And it comes out in sort of a kind of reads a little bit ritualistic or something. And it was during those 2 records that I really embraced a sort of a more embodied approach to performing. I performed in a chair with Spires for the most part, up through like 2017. For the most part, I was always in a chair. And I think it was in 2017 when I was touring with my friend Haley and her band Circuit des You. I was like, I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand. And I did. And I was like, whoa. And suddenly I could just, I don't know, like the area of space that I could command. And so my performances have always been embodied, but it's like, I needed that chair to contain my embodiness, because I'm sort of this walking paradox of like, being very channeled and pretty exuberant performer, but also being kind of shy at the same time. And so, but yeah, that was a big change in 2017 when I finally started to stand up, and my performances from then on took on an extra layer of movement and embodiment at that point. Okay, and so then important in terms of this selection, I mean, I actually, before this interview, I went back to just confirm what word you used. Like, was it your favorite? Was it most important? I just know that, like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, wow, what a challenge. Like, that's impossible. I have never been able to even tell you what my favorite ice cream flavor is, let alone my 3 favorite records or important records. So I really took it as like, okay, like, what records do I want to talk about or like give airspace to? And also like how they perhaps represent an aspect of my own practice or have inspired me in a certain way that has informed my practice.
Wonderful answer. So let's take whichever record you want to talk about first, Kat. I'll let you pick. Give me the name of it and then a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
Sure. Okay, well, the first record I chose was the 1967 release Love Forever Changes. And in some ways, I categorize these selections by like an element. And I look at this as like the air of my choices. And this record, I was introduced to when I was pretty young. I mean, not crazy young. I was probably in my early 20s. And I was living in North Carolina at the time. And I have a really dear friend from college, Steve Krakow, aka Plastic Crime Wave, who was a huge like influence and introduced me and Tara and the other Spires to so much good music. And this particular year, when we were kind of having this lost year in North Carolina, Steve sent us multiple cassettes of one album on one side and one album on the other side. And I remember specifically one cassette that was played a shitload was Coma's First Utterance on one side, and the other side was Vashti Bunyan, Another Diamond Day. But these tapes were like, I don't know, Harry Pussy, a lot of like Japanese psych, the Fushitsusha, Mainliner, Lydia Lunch, Eight-Eyed Spy, just like mind-blowing stuff. But one of those cassettes was Love Forever Changes, and I wish I remembered what the album was on the flip. Yeah. Because we did kind of like look at them as like this pairing. But that album, we had no context for it at all. But it was one that once we like slipped in to the cassette player, we just put on repeatedly. And I mean, in some ways, when you asked me like important records, I also thought a little bit of like Desert Island. And one was like, okay, well, one album I would really love to just be able to sing along to. And this is one record where I can just absolutely, put this on in a long drive and sing through the entire record. I think it is the most strange album in the sense that, and this has to do with a little of some of my other picks too, like it does not really fit cleanly into any sort of category. I mean, it takes elements of folk rock, but like there's psychedelic qualities to it for sure. There's some, obviously, like the Wrecking Crew does the instrumentation, so there's this really lush orchestral pop element to it. There's little flashes of like sort of Baroque stylings. There's a Latin flair to it, yeah. And so I mean, and then in 2003, I had the chance to see them play live at Park West in Chicago I'm not sure how many dates were on this tour, but it was the year after Arthur Lee got out of prison from a false allegation of like shooting a firearm illegally. And it was actually proved that he was not guilty, but he ended up having to spend 5 years in jail for that. And the year after he got out, they did this reunion tour, and it was incredibly amazing. They had a full orchestra section, a full like horn section. But I mean, yeah, this album, Love Forever Changes, I mean, I think it was a seminal 60s album that was like, when I was reading a little bit more about it, just on like the factual standpoint, like a lot of people look at it as kind of this like an album that's sort of like was just like the end of 60s idealism. And I think Arthur Lee supposedly was very kind of skeptical of the whole like countercultural movement, the 60s counterculture movement at the time. And, there's some kind of like dark, brooding lyrics on this record that I think were like, I don't know. I mean, the record didn't do super great when it first came out, but and I think maybe it was because like there was, I don't know, maybe people weren't ready for that darkness or something, or I don't know. I mean, I think my favorite of the tracks perhaps is The Red Telephone. I mean, just how it starts off, sitting on the hillside, watching all the people die. I'll feel much better on the other side. Right. And then my very, very favorite line, I believe in magic. Why? Because it is so quick. I don't need power when I'm hypnotized. Look in my eyes. And then that whole like, sometimes I deal with numbers, and if you want to count me out. I don't need the times of day. Any time with me is okay. I just don't want you using up my time, because that's not right. And then they're locking them up today. They're throwing away the key. I wonder who it'll be tomorrow, you or me. And then at the end, freedom, freedom. I want my freedom. All of God's children's got to have their freedom. And it's almost a little eerie there because it's like sort of like precedent of what's coming in Arthur's life later.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the next song, Live and Let Live. I mean, obviously, I think this is definitely considered a very psychedelic album. And I know the band, when they first started recording, I think they were having some drug issues and doing some, certainly LSD, and I think some heroin. I don't know how much they continue to do that throughout the course of this record. That's unclear to me. But there's a certain sort of surrealness to Arthur Lee's lyrics that I mean, like the Live and Let Live, okay? Oh, the snot has caked against my pants. It has turned into crystal. There's a bluebird sitting on a branch. I guess I'll take my pistol. I've got it in my hand because he's on my land. And like, this is how the story ended. And I mean, it's this kind of like fucked up track on land rights. Right. And, he references an Indian, or I'm assuming he's meaning a Native American later on in the song. And that song ends with "Write the rules in the sky, but ask your leader why." So anyway, that's my Air album. That's my language. I mean, that's like, the album where like if I was stranded on a desert island, I could sing my way through the hours.
For sure, yeah. It feels like a record when you describe certain contextual details of the album, and also when I've read about it as well, the fact that the band sounds like, apart from Lee, were really quite lackluster to begin with about recording it, and so they brought in session musicians to sort of scare the band, really, to be like, right, we're going to do it with these guys instead.
Totally.
And they were like, oh shit, and then had to get their act together to record the rest of the thing.
That's exactly right. That's what the wrecking crew and the studio musicians kind of got the rest of the band like into gear.
Yeah. I mean, that all sounds like the backstory of a record that was going to be a car crash, forced into life, sort of against the will of the band, just had to drag them through. And especially as well, it sounds like that the label were like, you should probably explore like more of a folk music sound on this record, right? It was at their instigation. I mean, label intervention is not generally associated with super results either,
I agree. I feel like this record had everything going against it. And the fact that it has become this strange classic now, it is mysterious. It is mysterious. I mean, there are several tracks I think on the record where it is just Arthur Lee and the studio musicians. The rest of the band's not even on it. So but I think the Brian McLean or whatever, I think the other guitar vocalist songwriter, I know he definitely penned a couple of the tracks, but I think most of them were by Arthur.
And you've had it in your life for so long. Has there been like an undulation in terms of your favorite tracks, or tracks that have really come out from nowhere for you and been like, oh shit, actually now this one really connects? Like, what's your relationship with it been like over the years?
Well, I mean, I think there are certain records, right, that stand the test of time, particularly like records that you like in high school. Maybe you don't anymore, but certain ones stand the test of time. And this one has, I guess, I don't know, maybe my relationship has changed in the sense that I've become more familiar with the legacy of the band, and I've become more familiar with the legacy of Arthur Lee and a little bit more of the context of the record. Whereas, my appreciation of it initially was just simply, how much I enjoyed the abstract, bizarre sort of lyrics and the great songwriting.
Magic. Why? Because it is so quick. I don't need power when I'm hypnotized. Look in my eyes. What are you seeing? I see. How do you feel? I feel real phony when my name is Bill.
Okay, cool. Carol, let's go to your second record now. So again, if you could give me the name of it and a little bit about why it's important.
So the other one I picked was the 1969 record Sonny Sharrock, Black Woman. And this one, kind of, maybe I was thinking the Fire Earth record, where this is definitely the release of the three. This is just an infamous explosion of a record that was recorded at a really, really charged time in the free music scene, the free jazz scene. And it has a incredible cast of characters. Sonny Sharrock on guitar, Linda Sharrock voice, Milford Graves is on drums, Morris Jones on bass, Dave Burrell on piano. And, again, this is a record that doesn't easily fit into a category and sort of straddles blues, gospel, rock and roll. I mean,
right.
Certain world music influences again. I don't think people have considered like the beginning of, was it Peanut and Portrait of Linda, sort of having these sort of Caribbean sort of hints to it. It's an absolute just onslaught. It's an exorcism, right?
Oh my gosh,
and this was actually, I was introduced to this one later, actually. One that had sort of missed my radar. So it was I don't know, maybe I just heard it for the first time, maybe 9 years ago, and then went deep into the world of Sonny Sharrock and checked out, his whole body of work, including the one he made the next year, Monkey, Pocky Boo, as well as the one he made 5 years later, Paradise, which is a tighter, groovier, funkier record. But this one I just wanted to give this one some airtime because, along with, of course, just every single person just killing it on this record. I also was just, so blown away by Linda Sharrock's performance.
Right.
Okay. So, and that was sort of an introduction to Linda. And, I've always just gotten super excited about anyone who tries to defy the limitations of whatever instrument they're using, whether it's, the guitar or whether it's voice. And there's moments in that record where, I don't know, the guitar becomes the voice becomes the guitar. They sort of melt into each other. You don't know what's what or who's who. And the sort of guttural, primal screams and yelps. I think, I don't know how much Linda was maybe influenced by, I don't know. There's speculation that she was really influenced maybe by Patty Waters' album College Tour, or her performances at that time, earlier in the 60s. But whatever it was, she was on her own trip. And, I think I just get a sort of exuberance when I listen to something that breaks all the rules, and kind of just and this album in particular, it has its wild, fiery tracks like Peanut and Portrait of Linda, Three Colors, but then track 4, suddenly it's just solo acoustic guitar, sort of in the homage to a blues player,
right.
Sort of, and so it has a very unique trajectory, the record itself. And I also kind of wanted to pick this record too because of, I forget if I picked it before I heard about Milford Graves passing or not, but
right.
I forget if I picked it before or after, honestly, but if I did pick it before, I'm really glad that I did, because just giving that creative, emancipated soul, some more devotion. I never met Milford, but I have some colleagues in New York who did. He had a kind of a small circle of kind of apprentices of sorts. And, he was just an incredibly influential person, musically and spiritually, and just someone who totally redefined what you can be as a person and what you can be as an artist. And this record just gives me nothing but energy and presence, you know?
Yeah. Beautifully put. I mean, this is the first time I'd heard this record.
Shit.
Definitely buying this. Holy shit. So you said you found out about it 8 years ago, right? Initially, or that's when you first heard it?
I first heard it right around when I moved to New York. Yeah.
Right. And did you like it straight away?
Well, I did, because again, I have a soft spot for any kind of wild banshee shit. You know, it's like, I think I have that sort of Yoko Ono, like stubborn persistence. I like a Yoko Ono. Okay. And so, no, I feel almost like a defense immediately, like this. Oh yeah. Call it just like the iconoclast or rebel, or I don't know. So yeah, I grew up, you know, a lot of the music. I mean, I was someone who like was really into like outsider music. You know, I liked, like, we loved the Shags. You know, we just liked fresh takes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is definitely one of those.
Did you resist it initially?
No, this was absolutely like, I just I was intrigued as to where you were at that time in terms of free music. I mean, whether or not this was one that you're like, whether or not it was, you know, something that you were completely into. I know sometimes with these important records, you know, they're ones that are initially like, oh, fuck this, you know, this is
right.
And then they, because they've broken something, you know, like
those are the interesting stories. Actually, I should have, that would be fun to have picked an album that I hated at first. And then yeah.
Oh,
no,
I'm
this
so
was
glad you picked this.
Pretty much love at first, at first listen. I mean, I've always been just, you know, attracted to like extreme vocal release. I mean, when I was living in New Orleans, when I heard Diamante Galaz being played by my neighbor upstairs, I just was,
oh my God, wow.
I just was like,
what a neighbor.
I went up and knocked on their door. I'd never even hardly met her. And I was like, what the F are you playing? Is this? And she's like, and then boom, that was my introduction to Diamante Galaz. But I mean, I had to troop right upstairs and get that information. It was essential.
Wow. Man, that's when you know that you're living in good company. Wow.
Yes.
So you said that this record took you into Sonny Sharrock's music generally. I mean, I don't know loads about him. I mean, what can you tell me about him? All I can see, all I kind of, when I did a kind of cursory check on him, was the fact that he considered himself a horn player with a really fucked up axe. And
I guess he initially wanted to play saxophone, or maybe that was even his first instrument, but he had a pretty vicious case of asthma, and so took the guitar instead. You know, okay, so yeah, when I said that I went and like researched more of his work, I guess I mean specifically those 3 records with Linda, which were, as I said, Black Woman Monkey, Pucky Boo, and Paradise, and then that record later that he came out called Ask the Ages, which I think was, I believe that was a solo release. I know that he did a lot of like collaborations with Bill Laswell, and maybe Bill Laswell produced some of his later records. I know that, like, for instance, Sharrock was, you know, he was playing with Pharoah Sanders pre Black Woman, and I just realized that, actually, looking into this a little bit before, that he played on Tawheed with Pharoah Sanders, and that was just like a year or two before the Black Woman album, as was Linda. Linda also played with Pharoah, which I don't think I've ever heard any of those recordings, but supposedly she did. And so I think he maybe went on to play a little more with Pharoah as well. But actually, in terms of like releases, the only one, I guess, I can think of right now is the Ask the Ages one. I know I actually talked to Byron Coley, because he wrote the liner notes to the re-release to this record that came out a few years ago by I think some European label. And I know that a lot of people were very sad at his death because they thought he died. He died relatively young, I think at 50, one or two or three or something. And it was like, supposedly he was like on the verge of signing a major deal or something. And so people think that like, oh, he never got to completely manifest his full self. But I mean, I think that what he left was pretty damn rich. So I'm happy for what he left.
Great. Well, Kat, let's go to your final record now. Again, if you could give me the name of it and a bit about why it's important too.
Yeah. The last one is the Eliane Radigue Songs of Milarepa. And, I noticed, I briefly went to your website and like checked some of the other artists that you've interviewed just because I didn't want to do tons of repeats, right? But I did notice that there were several artists that you've interviewed that picked Eliane, and I think that's very interesting. It makes total sense to me, though. Let's see. So this Eliane and this particular album of hers, Songs of Milarepa, I became familiar with, I guess, maybe around like 2008 or something. So also fairly recently, actually. And it was during this time I was actually a librarian in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was I think I was just doing some like research and ended up like ordering a ton of Eliane's records through Outer Library Loan at the time. And I think I had read some article just about the quote unquote women of electronic music, right? And this whole like cast of characters who are now finally kind of getting their like just dues,
right? Of
Eliane Radigue and Laurie Spiegel and Daphne Oram and Suzanne Ciani, are like being nodded as like pioneers in the world of like early electronic and synthesizer music. So I ordered a few of Eliane's CDs, and one of them was Songs of Milarepa. And this was actually what I got through Outer Library Loan was, I think, the 1998 Lovely Music reissue of the entire works that Eliane had done inspired by the Songs of Milarepa. I explain this because I later got confused because there's also an LP that's out that's called Songs of Milarepa that was put out through Lovely Music in 1983 that is a part of this like collection. I think it's specifically Mila's journey inspired by a dream, which is this like I think it's like an hour-long track. But I was confused because when I heard the LP, I was like, this seems different than what I had heard. So I went back and sort of researched it. And the record that I actually am referring to for listeners out there, it's a little tricky, honestly, is specifically finding, and it's uploaded to Vimeo, and I think all of them are uploaded to YouTube at least. And you can still order the CD from Lovely Music, I don't know, is the 1998 reissue that has all 5 tracks. Yes. Mila's Song in the Rain, Song of the Path Guides, Elimination of Desires, Symbols of Yogic Experience, and Mila's Journey Inspired by a Dream. And basically, I had no idea what I was putting on when I put this CD.
Wow.
I really had no idea. I mean, I certainly have had at that point, like some exposure to Tibetan Buddhism. I'd read a ton of books, dabbled with some meditation. Pema Chodron has been a major writer, influencer in my life with her amazing books, like When Things Fall Apart and The Places That Scare You, etc. So I had like a basis in Eastern, thought and specifically Buddhist thought. But when I put this on, and my brother, I think, was over at the time, we both just like laid down on our backs and like went on this journey with this record that not only was it an introduction to Eliane Radigue, it was also my introduction to Robert Ashley. So,
Right.
I mean, I think that it was this combination of, I mean, obviously Eliane Radigue's just amazing, subtle, spacious, sensitive fluctuations that she was doing. I believe it was the ARP 2500.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, there'd be these really long, just open spaces with just that synthesizer going. And then Robert Ashley's voice coming in. And it was just, it was such a surreal, disorienting, but also like totally captivating moment where, I don't know. I mean, his delivery, I just think is like, he's sort of like singing and speaking at the same time.
Yeah.
And these texts where he's just like, Robert Ashley's like his cadence and his choice of where he's going to put emphasis in a word on what syllable is so bizarre and so unique and so, as I said, like disorienting that it really worked for me. I mean, I feel like I went deep into this land of Milarepa and the stories of this like ascetic saint who, whenever a disciple would ask him a question, he would respond in song.
Yeah.
Because not only is so on this record, Robert Ashley is the English voice that's sort of telling the story of Jetson Milarepa, and is called by Jetson, is called by Mila, is called by Milarepa. All of those are the same person. And he was an 11th century Tibetan saint. And, Eliane quit music at a certain point and devoted herself to her practice, her Buddhist practice. And eventually, after 4 years, her Buddhist teacher sent her back to play music. And so Eliane went back and, for several pieces in a row, arguably for many of her pieces or arguably all of her pieces after that.
Yeah,
there's some relation or homage to Buddhist thought, but specifically the text was taken, I think, from a book of poetry that I don't know enough about the history of the book, but it was supposedly songs that Milarepa sang, and it's in Tibetan, and I think that Eliane, if I'm not mistaken, and her teacher somehow translated it into English. And so Robert Ashley does the English, and her teacher, I think, her name, like Rinpoche, Lama Kungpo Rinpoche, did the Tibetan version. So on the recording, there's Tibetan and English sort of juxtaposed. Yeah, it was a personal experience, I mean, made a big impression. And it was like a space. It was just like, it does the exact opposite, right, of what the Sonny Chirac record did. I think I was into this. I was really into this contrast idea of, because there's so many things that influence me. Space, non-space, minimalism, maximalism, whatever. And this one is just, to me, like just a deep, deep, deep chasm where if, again, I was on that deserted island, like this would be the one that I could just put on when I needed to zone. And in terms of the elemental aspects, this is definitely like the water of the album. Yeah. Were you familiar with this one?
Not this one. So I've been listening to her music for ages. About 12 years, and loved the music. I was so struck to hear this one with the voice coming in, right? Because I'm just not used to hearing that presence in her music. But it felt, after not too long, in total alignment, just because of the themes that it was addressing. I was like, yeah, this is an absolute, if I submit to this in the same way that I submit to her music, then it makes absolute complete sense.
Yeah. I mean, when I first heard it, again, as I said, I was not familiar with Robert Ashley. And so it was, I think, just like coincidentally, maybe a few weeks later, that somehow someone had played a Robert Ashley track for me. I forget which one. A same night that I was introduced to Scott Walker, actually. And
Bloody
so I was
hell.
like, whoa, what the fuck? And so I was like, oh, fuck, I think that's the same person who was reading on this Elion Radigue. And I went back, and indeed it was. And then, of course, I went deeper into Robert Ashley's, world, and, really, particularly really enjoyed that series he did. The one where he interviews in really long form, like 5 or 6 of these stalwart musicians at the time: Pauline Oliveros, David Behrman, Alvin Lucier.
Oh, cool.
I really, really recommend it if you haven't. I think it's called Music and the Roots of Ether. Music and the Roots of Ether is what it's called.
I'll check that out.
It's a fascinating interviewing series. I mean, the one with Pauline Oliveros is particularly interesting. I mean, it's one of those styles, like in classic Robert Ashley fashion, where like just dead air would happen maybe for like a minute and a half here and there. And throughout the course of the entire interview, he is having someone give Pauline Oliveros a total makeover. Like they're putting makeup on her.
What?
And they're like painting her nails. And I mean, it's
wow.
And I think it's worth a conversation. Like, what was going on there? And part of me thinks he was trying to like shake. He was trying to get a reaction out of Pauline. Is my theory. That Pauline Oliveros, she was so calm and collected, and just very beautiful, peaceful presence, and just seeing if you could get her out of her comfort zone, like not wanting, but nope, didn't.
I was going to say,
didn't ruffle a feather,
Absolutely.
Pauline was just like, oh, whatever, it's fine. Do whatever you want. Okay, cool. I mean, and obviously, I don't think Pauline is the type that likes to doll herself up,
No. I was going to say, though, I can only imagine Pauline rolling with that.
Yeah.
And can you tell me about listening to songs of Milarepa on a plane?
Oh, where did I think I mentioned, I don't know if it's necessarily the songs of Milarepa, but I think I mentioned that like I enjoy listening to Elion Radigue on planes.
Gotcha.
I think it's just that I like listening to Elion Radigue in planes. Primarily, I think, because her music just sort of sits there so beautifully within the drone of an airplane and the sounds of the airplane. And it's also just like such a calming, expansive music to sort of calm yourself on a plane that's just claustrophobic. And maybe I don't love flying. Like I know a lot of people don't for many reasons, but it just sort of like is a way to zone and chill out. But I think I responded to that on an interview when I was in Europe, and that particular trip, I think every time I was on the plane, I would listen to one of her albums. I think at the time I had it on my phone or some listening device. Her Feedback Works, I think, is what I was listening to.
Yeah.
Or the Kiema, I think, which was I'm not sure if that was part of a triptych of a few different pieces. Trilogy, I think it was one of those. I don't think I had the Milarepa on my plane device, but that would have been a great one. I wouldn't have said no.
Yeah, definitely is one of the few artists that you can put on a plane and not have the engine be a detraction. Like, it's really cool. Just goes straight into the flow.
Yes. And, there's an organization in New York called Blank Forms, and they are a curatorial platform, as well as they, put out releases, book releases, and LP releases, music releases. But they pre-COVID, not too far before all this craziness happened, they did some like live, not a screening, but playing like on the original tape of one of her really early works, Adnos, I think it was 1, 2, and 3. And it was perhaps a work that she made way early on in New York when she was like sharing a studio with Laurie Spiegel. And it's like I don't know, it's an incredibly long, it's in 3 parts, and each part is like 2 hours. And every night they had a listening session, I guess is what you would call it, for each of these parts. And I attended one of those, and it was such a beautiful, amazing experience. You know, it's like her music is, I think it's all about like playing it on the right speakers and in the right room and at the right volume, you know?
Totally.
And they did it excellently.
Amazing. Yeah, it's definitely one where it can just be a totally different record and kick up different frequencies and feelings just to change the acoustic environment it's in. I think it was in a church that I heard one of her pieces with everyone sat round in a circle facing each other, which was quite an odd way to experience a gig, especially if you're quite self-conscious. But obviously after about 10 minutes everyone had their eyes closed anyway, and it was just you're on Eliane's time by that time anyway, you know.
Yes, she has the amazing ability to just stop and slow down time, and I really emulate that, and really respect that so much.
Others attend to the business of this life. I concern myself with future lives. Others seek a pleasant mate. I'd only be troubled by a wife.
Kat, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for talking about, I mean, firstly, your new record, your music, but also these 3 important records and many other things besides. I've had a great time.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And if people want to check out your music again online, where's the best place for them to go to keep up to speed?
Yeah, I think probably, I always recommend the Bandcamp. It's one of the better portals out there. And I think if you do Baird Bandcamp, it'll pop up. So
wicked.
That is the way to go.
Cool. Thank you, Kat. And to everyone listening, see you next time. Goodbye.